Okay. Yeah, I need to give you permission, Joanna. Sheila has it. Oh, there. Okay, whatever you did, done. Okay, we're on for the recording. Welcome back. We are ACI course 4, class 1, March 17, 2024. Let's gather our minds here as we usually do. Please bring your attention to your breath until you hear from me again. Now bring to mind that being who for you is a manifestation of ultimate love, ultimate compassion, ultimate wisdom, and see them there with you just by way of your thinking of them. They are gazing at you with their unconditional love for you, smiling at you with their holy great compassion, their wisdom radiating from them, that beautiful golden glow encompassing you in its light. And then we hear them say, bring to mind someone you know who's hurting in some way. Think about how much you would like to be able to help them. And recognize how the worldly ways we try fall short. How wonderful it will be when we can also help them in some deep and ultimate way, a way through which they will go on to stop their distress forever. We're learning that that's possible. So I invite you to grow that wish into a longing. and that longing into an intention. And with that intention, turn your mind back to your precious holy being. We know that they know what we need to know, what we need to learn, what we need to do to become one who can help this other in this deep and ultimate way. And so we ask them, please, please teach us that. And they are so happy that we've asked. Of course, they agree. Our gratitude arises. We want to offer them something exquisite. And so we think of the perfect world they are teaching us how to create. We imagine we can hold it in their hands, in our hands, and we offer it to them, following it with our promise to practice what they teach us. Here is the great earth, filled with fragrant incense and covered with a blanket of flowers. The great mountain, 4 lands, wearing the jewel of the sun and the moon. In my mind, I make them the paradise of a Buddha and offer it all to you. By this deed, may every living being experience the pure world. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest community. Through the merit that I do in sharing this class and the rest, may we reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest community. Through the merit that I do in sharing this class and the rest, may we reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest community. Through the merit that I do in sharing this class and the rest, may all beings reach their total awakening for the benefit of every other. So thank you everyone for getting your papers done. It's satisfying, isn't it? To do it. So thanks for that. And thanks, Lisa, for gathering all the information. I really appreciate somebody else doing that for me. So we're on course 4 of the 18 Asian Classics Institute foundation courses. They're called. They're not so foundation. They're deep and rich. And I know many of you have already studied, right, 10 through 18, and now it's like we're going back and learning the foundation from what we've already dug into, which is a little bit odd, but I hope that it's helpful. At least it's helping you complete your package. So when we started over with this group, we started with the source of all my good practice module so that you could get the overview of the Lamrim, the courtyard in the middle of the house, the building, where your future Buddha you sits. And how do you make them for real? You have to come out this door. How do you get out that door? You have to get in that room. And how do you get in that room? By coming out of the one before, right? And all of those practices and realizations, and we got glimpses into how each step builds on the next. Then course 1 was the 3 principal paths. What are those 3 principal paths? The path to Phoenix, the path to the outhouse, and the path to the kitchen, right? No, it's some other 3 paths, right? I can read your lips. Somebody say them. I haven't seen it yet. Claire, what are those 3 principal paths? I know you know them.
So, renunciation,
Okay.
bodhicitta, and correct view.
Exactly. Renunciation, bodhicitta, and correct view. So technically, that means this curriculum is Mahayana, right? It's from the perspective of the greater capacity. But even as learning greater capacity, we learn about the lesser capacity as well. And but it's not like we're starting our practice from lesser capacity. So renunciation, bodhicitta, the wish to reach total enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And then the correct worldview, which isn't just learning about emptiness, it's learning about the marriage of emptiness and dependent origination, emptiness and karma. It takes both of those to have anything. And so we tend to want to say renunciation, bodhicitta, and emptiness. And that wouldn't be incorrect, it just would be incomplete. Because emptiness alone is actually pretty meaningless. Then, course 2 was Buddhist refuge. And course 2, if I'm recalling it correctly, it was mostly definitions, like lists and definitions. What do we mean by refuge? What do we mean by the 3 jewels? What do we mean by bodhicitta? What do we mean by nirvana? What do we mean by Buddhahood? What do we mean by these things? And then course 3 was that introduction to the tools for training our meditative concentration to come under our control. Training a meditating mind to be like a microscope, that we can decide what focal length, right? How focused, and then anything we put on the slide under the microscope, our mind will park on it to the same degree of interest and intensity, regardless of what the object is. And when we have that kind of concentration control, we have a tool that we can use to penetrate into the meanings of these concepts that we're learning about, to bring them to an actual experience, a meditative experience of them, which goes beyond verbal explanation. So you learn all the verbal explanation, mental verbal explanation, you hash it all out, and you come to some deep conclusion. And eventually that deep conclusion becomes this direct meditative experience of what all those words were trying to tell us. And you come out of that and you only have words to explain it again, but now you mean something different by the words than you did before, because of your experience in that deep meditation. So it's worth the effort to train that mind to get so controlled, to be like a microscope. Eventually, the realization we want to be able to hold is that direct experience of the no self nature of oneself and all existing things. But, as we're getting close to that through our study, through our contemplation, and through our efforts in meditating, we're growing that realization. So it's not like every time you meditate and you don't see emptiness directly, you have failed. It's not true. You have planted more seeds to get through that portal sooner, right? So don't give up. So then course 4, I don't know, I was trying to think, if I was designing this course, what would come hot on the heels of meditation? And like the last thing that comes to my mind is logic. Let's study logic next. That'll be so inspiring. What? But here we are, logic and perception theory. Now keep in mind that this is the curriculum taught to the monks who have in their intention earning their Geshe degree. Not all ordained people want to earn a Geshe degree. Not all those who want to earn it actually achieve it. But it's right, this is the educational training in the monastery. The young kids do get taught to read and write. And then the next thing they get taught is how to think clearly. And that's this. It's logic and perception theory. And it actually goes into all the stuff that we study in course 13. That's taught to the young teens, 12, 13-year-old, because they've learned to read and write. They've learned the basic rituals, and their actual study and debate practice starts with this material that we're going to cover in our course 4. So part of it is about how to think clearly, and we had that a little bit in our course 2. But more importantly, this course 4, it is a discussion that helps us come to recognize that we can, in fact, come to know things as true or as real, even if we cannot directly perceive them with our sense organs, right? Ordinarily, in our Western world, we say, how do I know something's real? I saw it. I heard it. I tasted it, right? I smelled it. That I, knew it was there. And so we confirm something's reality by way of confirming it with our sense powers, our sensory experience of it. And yet, when we learned about refuge and bodhicitta and nirvana, could we, can we use that criteria to say, I know Buddhas exist? Have we ever seen one? I know, it's like, would I even know it? If I did, that it should match the picture, right? It should match those 80 minor, 30 major marks, whatever it was, right? He should have the little goiter and the bump on his head, and he ought to be glowing in light, and he ought to have these webbed fingers, right? I've never seen anybody. I have seen people with webbed fingers, but then they didn't have the wheel, you know, they had this just one line. So it's like, I really can't say for sure that Buddhas exist, can I? If my criteria is, how do I know for sure David's bicycle, right, is still there because I can see it out my window. So Buddhas, nirvana, karma, enlightenment, technically past and future lives. These are things that, you know, we believe are true. We must, or we wouldn't still be studying at ACI 4 after 10 through 18. But do we have the conviction that those are existing things? The conviction that would keep us on our track when all that yak poop hits the fan, like personal yak poop hitting the fan for you. Don't even think about how horrible it could be, but we could all imagine some terrible circumstance in which we would find it very hard to take our refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha and want nirvana when we're like flat out trying to survive. It would be hard unless we had had some proof of those truths. But they aren't things that we can prove with our vision. And we've studied Course 13, most of us. We realize that, doggone it, even the things we prove with our vision aren't actually true, right? So we have to pretend we haven't studied that stuff yet for this ACI 4. ACI 4 comes to us actually from a lower school, from logic school, right? A school where things exist, they're all suffering, we're trying to end the suffering, but there are existing things and they change, right? And they're impermanent, but we're not at the level even of mind-only school in this discussion. But we'll see that growing this foundation, our mind-only 50-50 and highest school understandings will get stronger. Right? We just have to be careful with our language here. All right. So why study Buddhist logic? Because Buddhist logic teaches us how to prove things to ourselves that we can't directly perceive. If we can't prove those things to ourselves, then don't bother trying to prove them to somebody else. So we start with ourselves. So we first need to understand what it means to have a valid perception, a perception through which we can establish something to exist. And then we learn how those valid perceptions can be direct and indirect, and how through correct thinking we can prove things with as much validity to ourselves as a direct experience of it. through deduction. And then we learn the details of how to do that once we get to course 13. So here we're gaining the foundation of what we will build upon. So in the monastic training, the how to think is taught very early on. But the material of this particular course isn't taught until a few years before they're ready to sit for their Geshe debates, actually. So Geshe did this really skillful thing, right? He gave us the very beginning information, but he took us right to the end in the material that he taught us early on, right? So we're just baby Geshes in the making in ACI 4, but the sequence that we're going to use is used for the advanced classes. Interesting. Geshe said back then, not many of the monks stay in the Geshe course this far. So not many actually ever learn the material that you're going to learn. And then of the ones that do, they don't all go on to earn their Geshe degree. So they don't all go on to be able to teach this stuff to others. And so again, Geshe in his wisdom, he's providing us with this material in a way that he wants us to use to share with others. Because the brilliance of that is that by sharing it with others, we understand it better. Not just through the physical mechanism of sharing it, but through the seed planting of sharing it. So he's tried to make it as easy for everybody as possible, which is really sweet. So in Buddha's time, there were Hindu people, right? In Buddhist time, there were no Buddhists yet. Keep that in mind. Buddha was not a Buddhist. So there were Hindu people at that time who argued that there's no such things as past and future lives, that your mind dies when your body dies, that this life was your opportunity, do with it what you will, because when it's done, you're done. And that's pretty similar to what I grew up with. And I was as comfortable with it as my parents were comfortable with it, which seemed to be, as far as I could tell. And then, as some of you know, I had this peculiar experience that proved to me that that was not in case true. Like a direct experience, not in meditation, outside of meditation, but this direct experience that proved to me that my belief in this life is it, material world is reality, and there isn't anything beyond that, was just plain false. But when that got ripped away, I didn't have any of this other information. I just had nothing to go on. And it left me spinning in this black hole. I didn't know what was real at all. And I landed and I learned this and I learned that and it took me to here. But for me, it took some devastating, life-changing, horrible experience to prove to me that I was wrong. But then it was beyond any shadow of a doubt because it was an experience. It was an experience, not a dream, not a, it was, so anyway. So it's pertinent, this discussion is pertinent if we live amongst others whose belief system is, the material world is what's real. And, maybe there's an afterlife, but, not in the sense of some ongoing thing, not in the way that we have an understanding now. It's pertinent to have this discussion with our own selves about what happens afterwards. And this course isn't about what happens after we die, but as we're looking at how to prove to ourselves Buddha's karma, nirvana, what was the other one? Emptiness. We'll see that past and future lives are a necessary ingredient. And so we come to end up proving to ourselves the truth of the ongoing nature of your you, right? Not your name yourself, right? Not Sarahni, but the subject side of this mind stream goes on, always has and always will. To prove that to ourselves is a necessary piece to keep, right, from the losing it when the yak poop is hitting the fan. So so this course is actually called the proof of future lives. But we don't really sit down and do that proof. Maybe we talk about it at some point. Mostly this course is about proving the qualities of a Buddha. And then when we even get into that, it sounds like, how does that prove anything? It's just these words that we're using. So we're going to work it through the next 10 classes, if I do my job right. So to understand the logical arguments that we will hear, we need to understand about different levels of reality and what's meant by different levels of reality. We need to understand how we establish something as an existing thing. We need to understand how we actually perceive things, right? And how do we know what it is that we're perceiving? What comes first, right? The thing's identity or our perception of it. And it seems like it should be very straightforward, but when we get into it, it gets a little complicated. So we're studying a topic called in Sanskrit called pramana. In Tibetan it's sema. So I have a vocabulary list. Where's my share screen? Vocab. Share. Get us bigger. You guys go there. I go here. Do I have everybody? Yes, I do. And here. All right. So Sema is Tibetan. Pramana is Sanskrit. It's short A, long A, short A. Pramana. 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 I always say it wrong. That's why I'm having to check it. Pramana. 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 It means valid perception. Sema, valid perception. In logic school, they say valid, comma, correct perception. But when we get to course 13, we'll be saying, wait a minute, valid and correct are two different things. But at this school, valid and correct seem to be used synonymously. And for this group, I'm going to dance between those a little bit. And I want to lean more towards using the term valid perception so that we aren't getting confused between valid and correct. Although Geshe Michael, when he was teaching this course, he would use those terms interchangeably. And he was doing it on purpose, but I'm probably not going to, because it confused the heck out of me later. And I don't want to do that for you. Okay. So sema means valid perception. And pramana is the Sanskrit. So I make the difference between valid and correct because valid perception means we're perceiving an object with a state of mind that's not deceived by something else. When we're perceiving an object and we're not drunk or, so sick that you can't see straight, or there's something wrong with your eyes that you can't see properly, or you're so mentally afflicted, you're so angry, you can't really perceive clearly what's going on around you, or like you're like you're stopped in your car, like you're on this downhill slope and you're stopped in your car, and then the cars around you all move forward, but you're staying still, but you get the sense that you're moving backwards, or maybe the other way around. They all go backwards and you think you're going forwards. And it's like, whoa, you hit the brake harder. That's not a valid perception, right? Your car was not really moving. You just thought it was because everybody else went backwards. So those are not valid perceptions. Just because you're not perceiving clearly. But when we say correct perception, jump schools now. Let yourself jump to highest world view. When you perceive the scarecrow in the field, and it really is a scarecrow, are you perceiving the scarecrow in the field validly? Yes, if you're not high, etc. But are you perceiving the scarecrow in the field correctly? Correctly meaning in the way it truly exists. No, from highest school, how does the scarecrow in the field truly exist? Right? As my projection and nothing but. So to see the scarecrow in the field correctly, one would need to see it coming out of your seeds and its emptiness at the same time. Who can do that? Only Buddhas, if we believe there's such a thing as Buddhas, and we believe that they're omniscient. So technically speaking, unless we are Buddha, we can have valid perception, but not correct perception. And you see why we make that distinction here, because from logic school level, to say I see David's bicycle out my window is a valid perception because my mind's not all screwed up. And it's a correct perception because it is his bicycle out there. It's not the neighbor's, right? It's not a motorcycle, it's a bicycle, right? I'm both valid and correct in lower school. Do you see? So valid and correct is true in lower school if we're talking just about our simple human experience, but not correct, valid but not correct if we're speaking from highest school, right? So only Buddhas have valid and correct perceptions, and technically they have them all the time, constantly. So to better understand what it is to be Buddha, we would want to better understand what it is to have valid and correct perception all the time. And that's not something that we can directly perceive yet, but we can prove the truth of it by way of deduction. And that's what we're going to learn in this course. So the topic is tsema or pramana. As I say, the topic is first introduced to the kids when they're about 12, and then they spend 3 months every year, the winter months, studying more deeply this topic of valid perception and pramana. For most of us, 99% of our experiences are tsema, valid perceptions. The only time they're not is if we're intoxicated, so sick, or so mentally afflicted that we're not seeing straight. So most of the time, we are in a state of pramana, valid perception. Okay. These valid perceptions make our world, make our experiences. So now, in order to understand that connection between our valid perceptions and the existence of those things that we experience, they give us a definition. This word seni, it means definition. So anytime you see it, you know you've got a definition. And anytime your homework asks you for a definition, what's the definition of blah, right? Say it word for word, just memorize it, sorry. Because Geshe Michael has translated those definitions very precisely. And by the time we get to ACI 15, we see why, right? So the definition of an existing thing is what this sentence gives us. And Claire has beautiful, beautiful reading skills. Claire, will you read us our definition of existing things, please? It's this one.
Tsema mikpa yupe tseni.
Yeah, she sounds just like a Tibetan. Tsema mikpa yupe seni. So please say it to yourself for the seeds so that we can keep Tibetan in the world. Tsema means valid perception. Mikpa means perceived, perceived. Yupe means of existence, and sene is definition. So sene, yupe sene means the definition of existence. Sema mikpa, that which is perceived by a valid perception. The definition of existence is that which is perceived by a valid perception. You could say by valid perception. Think about that for a minute. How do you establish something as existing? Just perceive it with a valid perception. Doesn't that mean that we would have to see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it with a mind that's not intoxicated, not sick, not mentally afflicted to prove existence? Wouldn't that mean that the only existence is the physical world existence? If it's true that to establish an existing thing, we need to perceive it with a valid perception. By perceiving it with a valid perception, the thing exists. But we would then want to ask, is sensory perception the only kind of valid perception that proves things exist? Right. And Olga says, no way. We know that's not true. And that's the point. Because if it were true, I could not have had that experience of something beyond the physical happening. And I did. So, but what if I had never had that experience and somebody's trying to prove to me, that that could happen? There'd be nothing they could say to make me believe it unless they went through some logical sequence where, do you believe this? Yes. Do you believe that? Yes. Do you believe this? Yes. Well, what if all those three things came together in a certain way? Couldn't such and such happen? Yes. Right? We can prove something to ourselves that we already know the aspects of, but we've never thought of the ramification. So that's where this is going. We establish something as existing by perceiving it with valid perception. Now let's learn how to perceive things with valid perception beyond the physical. Now that opens us up to a whole lot of possible existing things that we couldn't prove to ourselves before. And now we're going to be able to do so. Hopefully, if I do my job right. Right? Okay. So direct sensory experience is only one kind of valid perception. Correct deductive perception is another kind of valid perception. Jetsun-Kappa, our hero Jetsun-Kappa, he has those two main disciples, right? Gyaltsab-je on his right and Khedrub-je on his left. Khedrub-je, he was teaching also, and then of course after Jetsun-Kappa left, Khedrub-je was teaching, and he would say to the people he was teaching, you people, you're all taking refuge in the Buddha, but you don't have a clue as to whether or not that Buddha exists. Right? He's teaching people who are culturally Buddhist. You grow up taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, but you never really stop to prove it to yourself because you wouldn't, right? Mom and dad believe it. My brothers believe it. Of course, I'm going to believe it too. Until the yak poop hits the fan. Then maybe it doesn't seem like I can go for refuge in the Buddha, because where the heck is he when life's going wrong? Okay. So Khedrub-je says, you've all been taking refuge in Buddha, but you don't have a clue as to whether Buddha exists or not. You have no evidence that there's a being like that. a being who is totally compassionate, totally omniscient, like ready to come to you at a moment's notice. How can you take refuge in something that you don't know exists? Right? We've heard it before. Blind faith will fail us. Faith born of logic is stronger than cement. And so we want to learn to think clearly. All right. So deductive reasoning is another form of sema. To use deductive reasoning to come to a conclusion, that conclusion is a valid perception. And that valid perception establishes something as existing. Right? One would need to probably be clear that if you're using that clear thinking to establish something through deductive reasoning as truly existing, that now it's truly existing for you, and you want to impose that on others, but you would need to help the other come to that conclusion for themselves by guiding them through their clear thinking, rather than just saying, I used clear thinking on me, so now it's true for everybody. Right? We want to believe that, but it's not going to work, is it? Because it didn't work for me. Somebody else has proven Buddhas exist and told me they exist, but I still don't know for sure. I need to prove it to myself. Okay. Okay. So now, the thing about Buddhist logic, technically any logic, is that we can only use reasons for our argument that the other person already believes are true. Right? So now we're talking to ourselves, right? Here's the me trying to prove Buddha exists, and here's the me that doesn't know it yet. So the me that doesn't know it yet needs to already agree with the arguments that the one who's trying to prove it is going to tell me. And then if I agree with this, and then I agree with that, then here's the conclusion. If you like you add the sum, here's the number 2, and here's the number 3. You know 2, right? Yes. You know 3, right? Yes. So then if you add 2 to 3, you get 5, right? Right. Logic is kind of like that. We don't give some reason to the other that they can't confirm themselves as a reason to believe something new. It wouldn't work, right? So our argument statements need to be clearly designed to help the other think through things that they already know to be true, but to add them together in a way that brings them to a new truth. So suppose somebody used to believe you add 2 to 3 and you get 23. And you're trying to show them that no, when you add 2 to 3, you get 5. So, right, you say, here's 2, right? And you go, yeah, there's 2. And here's 3, right? Yeah, there's 3. So now, true, if you wrote it 2 and then 3, it would look like 23, like you're saying. But if we add them together, right? Now, how many do you have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you see? So we took two things that we already knew to be true, but we thought had a different conclusion. And now we've showed ourselves that, oh, no. It's a new conclusion from these old beliefs. Is what we're trying to learn to do with our logic. Old reasons put together in a new way gives us a new understanding, a new thing that becomes real for us. Sema, pramana. All right. So in our developing our reasoning, for instance, you would not go to Geshe Michael and try to use any kind of argument to convince him of past and future lives, because he already knows the truth of past and future lives. Not just, don't waste your time or his, but in terms of logic, the rules of logic, your logic, even if it was accurate, would be wrong because you're trying to prove something to somebody that already knows it's true. Buddhist syllogisms are correct syllogisms only when you're pointing out things that they already know to bring them to a new conclusion that they didn't know. Okay. So again, we learned the mechanism of doing that in ACI 13. Just about it here. That method of reasoning also helps keep us on the same turf as the person we're interacting with. If we were highest school and we're talking to somebody who's, first school, that we're not helping if we're trying to prove to them that everything's existence is emptiness and dependent origination, if they're struggling to understand the impermanent nature of something. And if the impermanent nature of something would give them this deep aha that would give them such comfort, then that's the level we want to be helping them on, rather than, impermanence is important, but come on, the most important is to know emptiness and dependent origination. You meet the other on where they are and help them understand a little better. And it's true for our own self, because again, we're doing this for ourselves first. Meet ourselves on our own level and help us urge ourselves forward. It will be much more smooth and effective than trying to land ourselves in the seat of highest worldview before we've got a really strong connection with the truth of Buddhas and nirvana and karma and emptiness. All right. So these teachings come down to us in a long chain through the lineage. And the beauty of the Gelugpa lineage is that it is intact still all the way back to Lord Buddha's teaching. So Lord Buddha did teach logic. I don't know if he was in the debate ground, but he did teach Buddhist logic. And then someone or more of his students taught it to their students, who taught it to their students, and etc., without it being lost somewhere along the way. And apparently, I don't know these things, but Geshe Michael's instruction was that the Sakyas and the Nyingmas they were all, and the Kagyus, they were all great debaters at one time. And then through the process of, progress and how it goes, that debate lineage somewhere along the way got lost. Meaning, at some point it stopped being taught. And then it's just gone. And with the Gelugpas, they kept the debate lineage going strongly. They kept the logic teaching in there strongly. They just had the foresight to do so, apparently. But it's helpful to know that when we're studying something, that the lineage has not been lost. There hasn't been a missing link. And it's important later in terms of taking our studies, deeper into personal transformation to understand the power of this unbroken lineage. So one of the ways that the way we keep the lineage unbroken is by sharing what we learn. Whether you become a formal teacher or not isn't so critical, as long as somebody's doing that. But in terms of passing on our own personal understanding, to share what you're learning with someone else is what it is to help the lineage continue. So one of the ways we see the lineage continuing is by way of the texts that we have available to us for study. And again, deep gratitude to Geshe Michael for translating these into English, or I'd be out of luck for sure. And great gratitude to the Tibetan culture that kept them so intact for so long. And then great gratitude to the circumstances that took those collections elsewhere, so that when they were lost or damaged in Tibet, they could be found elsewhere. And great gratitude to ALL and all the sponsors of ALL. They're still finding collections of texts that many are repeats of what they already have, but there are some others that had not been known that were there. And so the collection is growing, thank goodness. As long as somebody can read and interpret Tibetan. So anyway, we have this series of texts that we are studying from that make up your reading in ACI 4. There are 4 principal texts that we will use. Here are the 4. The main one is in Tibetan. It's called Sema Namdral, Pramanavartika. Oh, it's time for a break. Pramanavartika, let's take a break before I start the text. So stop share, get refreshed. I will pause the recording. It's recording.
I will read.
Okay. All right. Share screen. All right, our 4 textbooks that we will be studying. The main one is called Semanamdral Pramanavartika by Master Dharmakirti, 300 AD, India. This is an Indian man. This is an Indian text. So its original was in Sanskrit. It was translated into Tibetan. Semanamdral means commentary on valid perception. Commentary on valid perception. So it sounds like it's a text that's talking to us about valid perception, what it is, you know, how you get it, etc. But the commentary on valid perception means that it's a commentary on a text called valid perception. And that text that it's referring to is called Sema Kuntu. Sema Kuntu means compendium of valid perception. And it was written by Bastard Dignaga 440 AD in India. So 200 years before Master Dharmakirti, Master Dignaga wrote this compendium on valid perception. What he did to make this compendium is he went into all of the scripture, I'm blanking on those two words, the Kangir and the Tengir. And he cut and pasted, right, everything about logic and valid perception and perception theory that had been taught by Lord Buddha and those after him. And he put that all together into this teaching compendium, like, so he would have it to teach his people. They say then Master Dignaga is the founder of logic or of perception theory, but he didn't found it, right? He just pulled it all together and put it in one place from Lord Buddha's teachings and those who came after, who clarified it afterwards. Then, but it's really hard, apparently. And so over the years, in order to access the wisdom in the compendium, Master Dharmakirti comes along and he writes a commentary on that compendium. Right? This is what that means. This is what that means. And that's the Semanandra, Pramanavartika, that Geshe refers to a lot in various teachings. But then Semanandra is really difficult to understand as well. And so in Jetsongkhapa's time, he has this student Gyaltsabje, and Gyaltsabje writes a commentary on the commentary to help his students understand it better. And he titles that commentary Tarlam Selje, which means light on the path to freedom. But it's very deep and difficult also. And so in more modern times, 1928 to 1997, Geshe Wangchuk is teaching his students, and he puts together another text called Sema Gongyen, which means the jewel or the ornament of true thought. Sema Gongyen. And so this is a commentary on the light on the path to freedom, which is a commentary to Semanandra, which is a commentary to Sema Kuntu. So technically this list, if it were by time, Sema Kuntu comes first, then Semanandra, then Tarlam Selje, then Sema Gongyen. Right. Geshe put this one first because it's the main one that's used to study in the monastery. But in order to understand it, they use Tarlam Selje and Sema Gongyen. And so he translated them into English for us. Then there are more simplified texts that the kids use when they're first learning. So these texts are being taught to the Geshes a few years before they're going to sit for their actual final debate. But in order to get there, as 12-year-olds, they're taught from two texts called the Dura and the Taprik. Taprik. I don't know how to say that. Why is my thing not moving here? I know why. There we go. Get you back. Okay. So Dura is the title of a collection of texts that's called Collected Topics. That's what Dura means, collected topics. And Taprik is the study of formal logic and reasoning. So when we learned about the syllogism and how to investigate the syllogism, that comes out of these simple early texts that the young people are taught. Then within the Dura collected topics, there are a whole slew of topics, but the three most important ones are the topic called sensun, which means how to define something, the definition of definitions, so that when we make a definition of something, it really can define that thing. And then we also learn that when we're thinking definitions, we're thinking, how do we put the words together in the right way so that, you know, everybody else can understand it in the same way as me? That is one thing about definitions. But then we learn later that when we're talking about what defines something, what we're talking about from a higher school is how do we come to recognize it? Like what defines fire? It's not the words in the dictionary. It's the hot and burning. So what defines fire is you put your hand over it, ow, right? That's fire. So to define something means it becomes real for you. And that's different than what are the words in the dictionary. So somehow those two come together by understanding these principles of defining things. Sensun. Shidrup is the topic about that outline of all existing things. Like, do you have that in your head? Consider all existing things, changing things, unchanging things. Within changing things, there's physical, there's mental, there are changing things that are neither of those two completely, right? That algorithm that to have a method of establishing like categories of all existing things, so that if we're trying to prove ourselves something about the color red, that we can make sure that what we're saying about the color red pertains to everything that the color red is or can be. So we need to have this method of knowing what we mean by all existing things and how to divide them down so that when we work with them, we don't leave any stone unturned. And so there's this whole topic of consideration, learning how to do that within clear thinking. Shidrup, it's called. And then the third one, Chicherak, that we're pretty familiar with that one. That's the study of things that are general and things that are specific, is one way of trying to describe that, like set and subset, or like classes and subclasses of things, but none of those are quite right. Chicharak is about coming to intellectually understand how it is that something moves from a general idea into a specific appearance of that general idea. And we've all studied it a little bit. You know, Geshe Michael's classic is meditate on the difference between quote car, a car, that car, the car, my car, good car, bad car, green car, blue car, right? How that image gets more and more specific from this generalized, like not even an image yet, an ideal. And then how does that become from the ideal car into my blue Subaru sitting out in the carport right now? Right? To learn how that works, to try to learn how that works, actually will lead us to the direct perception of it, which is the direct perception of dependent origination. And hot on the heels of that will be the fact that nothing exists in any other way than that. So in terms of looking for a process to set the dominoes to the direct perception of emptiness in motion, once we have that meditating mind, we use it to work on our chicharak until we have that experience of, oh, the seed ripening. And then run and jump on your meditation question, because the next thing up could be your direct perception of nothing exists in any other way than that. And that's your direct perception of emptiness if you sink into it, you know, undistractedly, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So, you know, it seems like a children's text, but, you know, deep, important principles being taught and methods being taught that being planted in our minds that are going to help us grow our wisdom. So Geshe says over and over again, studying logic is the key to Madhyamaka, the key to middle way, is growing our ability to think clearly. And that then is the key to seeing emptiness directly, which of course is the key to nirvana and enlightenment. We've been told. So we want to be able to learn the clear thinking methods through which we can prove that to ourselves, if we haven't already. So Geshe was sharing that when he was living in at the monastery in New Jersey, they had, you know, some of the old Mongolian masters living there too, and there was one guy who was actively dying, and Geshe went to visit him, and the monk was there in bed with his Dura text, like from when he was 12 years old. He still had his text on debate, and he's reading that. And Geshe said, he asked him, he said, Geshe, you're dying. Like, what are you doing reading Dura? And the Lama said, yeah, this is what I want to have on my mind when I pass. Like, this is the key to middle way. So he's making himself read about logic, hoping it'll be on his mind when he dies. Tells us the power of logic. Right? It is for the purpose of reaching nirvana and enlightenment. All right. So one might want to ask, did the Tibetans make this all up? Or did Buddha teach logic? And in that compendium, back from 440, AD, which was still a long time after Lord Buddha walked the earth, right? 550 BC to 440 AD, that's a long time. But Buddha is quoted as having said, quote, if you are me or one like me, you can judge another person. But if you are not like me and you judge another, you will fall. You will fall, it says. So apparently through the years, that's been morphed into you will fail, meaning you'll be mistaken about your judgment about the person. And Geshe said he went back into the scripture to check. Did Buddha say you will fail, or did he say you will fall? And it's very clear he says you will fall. Does that mean when you judge somebody wrongly, you just fall down, go boom? No, it means you'll fall to a lower realm. If we judge another and we're not omniscient and compassion, made of omniscience and compassion, we will be so mistaken about our judgment of that other person, and then hence our behavior towards them, that we will plant the seeds that will land us in a lower realm. And the commentary says probably a hell realm, like don't think, oh, that's okay, I'll just become an owl, and that won't be so bad. It's like, no, wrong. Any lower realm is awful, but mostly when they say you'll fall, they mean fall to the worst, right, places. But what does it mean to judge another? Like, we judge others all day long, just in terms of, they're older than me, they're younger than me. That's a judgment, isn't it? Does Buddha say don't do that? I mean, it'd be ideal if we didn't do that, but that's not that's not really what they're talking about. Not making a judgment about how we need to behave. We have to make those judgments. Implied in there is make a negative judgment, right? To think we know why they are behaving the way that they are, to think we know better than what they should have done in that situation. That, right, when somebody, the boss is yelling at us and we're judging the boss as bad boss, everybody knows they're a rotten boss. They know everybody dislikes them in the same way. So that justifies my thinking of them in such and such a way. And that justifies my, I don't know, lying to wiggle out of the whatever they're blaming me for. And everybody will agree with me that because they're inappropriate and they just fly off the handle, right? All that kind of judgment, thinking we know what's on their mind, thinking we know what's motivated them. That we can't know, right? We don't know if that boss's wife just left him, and he's just so distraught that's why that slight mistake that I made set him off so badly. Like, if I knew that, I would cut him a little slack, wouldn't I? Maybe his daughter just got killed. I mean, that's horrible. You can think of horrible things that would make somebody behave badly, and then we'd like, oh, I'm so sorry. Our own hurt would become a little bit more secondary than that. And yet our habit is, we're so within our own realm of, they hurt me, I don't like that they must have done it because, I don't know, they don't like me, or they did it because they think so and so is better than me and they want to put me down, right? The way our mind goes off on making a story about what's just happened, those seeds are seeds that if any one of them ripens at the moment of death, is for sure not going to land you back as a human. Right? Because being human is a result of extraordinary kindness. So to have this idea in mind, like why did Buddha say that you have to be omniscient in order to judge someone? He means we would need to be omniscient to be able to know correctly why they're behaving the way that they are. And if we knew correctly why they were behaving in the way that we wouldn't hold them responsible, right? If we knew the seed that was planted that made the boss get angry at the moment, we would also include knowing that, oh man, that was actually my seed that made them get angry at me at the moment. Who should I be judging here? Right? Whose behavior should I be concerned about? Theirs at me or mine at them? So that they say that this quote, if you are me or one like me, you can judge another. But if you are not and you judge another, you will fall. That is proof that Lord Buddha taught logic. Cook that one. It is a logical syllogism, actually, right? And he's using logic there. But it also does not mean that we just then ignore anybody's behavior. Like, I can't judge their behavior. I see somebody beating somebody up, but who am I to judge? I'm not a Buddha, right? We also have our bodhisattva intention, at least, to help stop suffering. So we can't say, oh, I'm not going to judge what's going on over there, because it's not judgment to see that somebody's getting hurt. But a wise judgment would be, there's two people getting hurt here. The one who's ripening their karma and the one who's planting their karma. And what can I do to interfere in some way? It doesn't mean step in the middle of it. Drop your purse, pull the fire alarm, stand out in traffic so the horns all honk. Something that'll make that altercation go, what's going on? Right? And we've broken a cycle there. So to not judge doesn't mean to not act, but act out of compassion and wisdom. And, this is what it looks like's going on, and I see harm happening. I need to do something, but not with the judgment of victim perpetrator. There is a victim, there is an apparent victim, there is an apparent perpetrator. But stop it right there and somehow get help, right, for both of them. So Buddha is saying this is why we need logic, because we can't know. Until we're omniscient, we don't know what's really going on. So if we rely only on our sensory apparatus, we only get a piece of the picture, and a very small piece, actually. So if we have this ability to use reasoning, deduction, we can come to conclusions that take us deeper than the sensory can take us. But we need to do it accurately. Otherwise, we're just fooling ourselves with our reasoning, which is the kind of reasoning that most of us learn how to apply, right? And so we want to retrain ourselves in our reasoning ability. Mostly our reasoning is, let's go to Chinese food. Why? Because it's better for you. Why? Because it doesn't have so much cheese. Why? Right? If the person just keeps saying why, you finally, it's like, because I want Chinese food, right? Why didn't you just say that to begin with? And be honest. But it's not a logical reasoning, right? Especially for Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva would say, let's go to Mexican because you want Mexican, even though I mean, right? So using logic can help us in our interactions with others. So the commentaries all say that verse, if you are me or one like me, you can judge another, is the ultimate source for Buddhist logic, teaching us not to judge others, meaning not judge them as if we know what they're doing. So then there's just a little bit more. I said before, Jetsun Kapi had those two disciples, Kedrub J and Gyaltsab J. Gyaltsab J was actually a logician in his own right, a good one. And he heard about this young upstart guy from the onion fields who was teaching around and getting this reputation. And in his pride of being a good debater, he decided he would go to this guy from the onion fields teaching and show him a thing or two. So the short version of this story, we'll get the longer one later, is that Gyaltsab J shows up at the teaching. Jetsun Kappa has already started teaching, and Gyaltsab J marches right down the aisle and goes and gets up onto the teaching throne with Jetsun Kappa. And Jetsun Kappa just doesn't lose a beat in his teachings. And so Gyaltsab J is sitting there with him listening. After a little while, Gyaltsab J gets up off the throne and goes down and sits in the audience. And after a little while later, Gyaltsab J is prostrating, right, during the teaching. And by the end of the teaching, Gyaltsab J goes to this young upstart and asks him to be his teacher. And it's like, that's pretty impressive. First of all, for Gyaltsab J, right, to be open enough to hear something new from someone young that he intended to go disrepute, to then hear something so profound that he changed his mind on the spot. Really beautiful. But the reason it comes up is because he then went on to say that once he took Jetsun Kappa as his teacher, Lama Tsongkhapa taught him everything. Like from the beginning, he started all over and learned it all, including logic, including Diamond Way. And in the end, Gyaltsab J would say, the kindest thing that Lama Tsongkhapa ever did for me was to teach me logic. From someone who had mastered logic. And that's the lineage that we're in, is Lama Tsongkhapa's lineage, and that's the logic we're learning. So hopefully it moves us to want to try it on for size and not go, logic, right? It really is useful. And I know I've told you before that for myself, I went through school. I had to work really, really hard in school, but I got A's. I did well. I knew how to succeed in school, and I did school, and I did college, and I did college multiple times, multiple degrees, multiple. And I figured it out and I was good at it. But I realized I didn't learn to think until I took the ACI series, and actually until somebody had asked me to share it with them. And then suddenly it was like, oh, this is what they mean by thinking. Like before, I was just putting it in, spitting it out, putting it in, spitting it out. But I didn't really learn how to think until I studied logic. And I'm not a syllogism maker. But what I learned is like, I hear somebody make a statement, and my mind can think of all the different ramifications of what could be meant, could be understood by that statement, and how everybody's going to hear it a little bit differently. And then how absurd it was that the person said it, the person usually being me, right? Or David said it, because it's just like, we have all these reasons that we do things and that we share with people, and everybody goes, yeah, yeah. And then when you think about it, it's just like, oh my God, it just doesn't work like that. And I can't even use a direct example at this, but became so clear to me that all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I just learned how to think. And I was 40, I was nearly 50 years old before I learned how to think. So, you guys already know how to think, but I hope that it will get fine-tuned, because it's so helpful, really. So helpful to be able to see the ramifications before you choose which path to go down with your behavior. It really is helpful. All right. Okay, that's our class 1. I get the extra 15 minutes later, but I'll give it to you now. So any questions? I mean, I'm sure there's lots, but anything need clarifying before you try to do your homework? Yay, good. So remember that person we wanted to be able to help at the beginning of class? We learned stuff that we will use sooner or later to help them in that deep and ultimate way. And that's a great, great goodness. So please be happy with yourself. And think of this goodness like a beautiful glowing gemstone that you can hold in your hands. Recall your own precious holy being. See how happy they are with you. Feel your gratitude to them, your reliance upon them. Ask them to please stay close, to continue to guide you and help you and inspire you. And then offer them this gemstone of goodness. See them accept it and bless it. And then carry it with them right back into your heart. See them there, feel them there. Their love, their compassion, their wisdom. It feels so good, we want to keep it forever. And so we know to share it by the power of the goodness that we've just done. May all beings complete the collection of merit and wisdom, and thus gain the true ultimate bodies that merit and wisdom make. So use those 3 long exhales to share this goodness with that one person. to share it with everyone you love, to share it with every being you've ever seen or heard of. See them all filled with happiness, filled with loving kindness. And may it be so. Okay, thank you so much. Would someone be so kind as to explain to Olga the process of doing the homework and grading your own and the quiz and then submitting, make sure that Olga's on, right? Okay, good. Thanks. Welcome, Olga. Nice to have you. Right. All the rest of us know the scoop, right? Yeah. Okay, good. All right. I will see you again on Sunday and Thursday evening, correct? All right. Have fun. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks again, Flavia. You are amazing. Stopping recording. Yes.